hey, that's what awareness feels like, joy and happiness and freedom. And we return to our deeper nature over and over. We become more or less happier than we have been before. We do not have an outer reason to be happy because we don't need an outer. If it shows up, wonderful. If it doesn't show up, we're still happy. And it's also my belief, and actually a little bit of my experience, that when you retain this happiness and this joy and this peace, what you find around you is the world begins to shuffle itself and begin to show you more of the happiness and peace experiences and fewer of the angry loss and sadness experiences. Thank you. Great music today. Thanks for singing. You all sound really good when you let it rip, so thank you for doing that. Happy Memorial Day. This is a day that was started in 1868, 3 years after the end of the Civil War, to commemorate the soldiers that died. It has been now it includes all the soldiers that we've had in the 12 wars that the United States has fought including the Revolutionary War. And 1.1 million soldiers have died in war for the United States. That's a lot. And I have been alive long enough to see 4 wars. Pretty impressive, isn't it? 4 out of 12. Must be picking up pace, and of which I'm not very happy. So I want to say that one of the things that has struck me is the title of today's talk is, "What Would You Die For?" And of course, on Memorial Day, we know that 1.1 million people have died for this country, or for their fellow comrades, because they're trying to save them in a more personal way. But that's what they died for. I would like to say there's something that, when I was thinking about this, that struck me, is that most of us don't have a direct "I will die for you," meaning literally I will take absolutely the surety of I'm dying and you are living as an equation. Most of the things we die for, it's a risk. It's kind of like I'll put myself in harm's way, but I'm not sure I'm going to die for it, right? And I was thinking along those lines, then really everything we do that seems like to be a risk is something we would die for in a certain sense. We'd be willing, we're taking a risk, maybe a calculated risk, maybe a minor risk, but there's something we would die for. I have been reading a book about one of my friends who was a world famous climber, Royal Robbins, and I think of all the chances he took to become world famous as a climber, but not to become world famous, but because he was intent on doing something that was hard, that fulfilled his soul. And so I looked it up, and how many climbers die a year? About 30. Okay, so his odds were pretty good, really. And then I was a kayaker, so I looked up how many kayakers die a year, because I was doing it for fun and for adventure and perhaps for a sense of accomplishment or proving myself in some way. And then about 96 people die a year as a kayaker. And then I thought, well, what about people who drink? I mean, there's a risk in that, and the statistic comes out to about 178,000 people die each year from drinking or complications like cancer or heart disease, etc. And then I thought, well, how many people die from drugs? And I believe the number is 87,000 die from overdoses. So what would you die for? A chance to be happy, a risk to find the thrill of adventure, the need to have relaxation by drinking or drugging or something, or the big one, which I don't even think I have down here, is how many people die from car wrecks. It's a lot. I think it's 48,000 a year. So I just want to say, the question of what you would die for is actually rather complex, isn't it? We typically think that what we would die for is someone we loved, like I would do it for my children. And many parents literally are willing to do that, or maybe for a loved one, or in some cases for, I was reading of a school teacher, elementary school teacher, who'd been trained in the protection of children when a mass shooter was there. And he said, I definitely have figured out I would die for my children. So we got that. And then we have this idea that I might die for a cause. You know, people who die for a cause, who let's say would die for justice or for freedom or something along those lines, who have a philosophical or a ethical idea that they think is worth dying for, and they would actually do that in the service of bringing about more justice or freedom, some sense of equality. And then there's the people who would die for a religious reason, like martyrs in Christianity was well documented in the early part of Christendom, and even occasionally now people die as martyrs in Christianity. And you see in Islam it seems to be a bit more fashionable now than in Christianity, that people die with saying they're doing it for their religion. There are lots of reasons people would choose to die. I think one of the things that's happened in the 20th and 21st century in America is that many people say, I don't think there's anything I would die for. And I believe that really comes from an over-identification with the body and your life as it is. That one of the secrets of leading a very brave and spontaneously courageous life is to have a deep understanding that you are not your flesh, that this flesh is not all you are, and so what you are will not end when the body stops breathing. And that's a big leap for many people who have no religious training, no deep spirituality, have no faith in what the traditions have said, is that, you know, you have a life after death. That in a country, our country in particular, that has become so materialistic, meaning that it believes that matter is the source of everything, and anything that isn't made of matter, like spirit or soul or something like that, is really a fairy tale that was told to placate people or keep them in line. And the threat of something after death has worked for that purpose, but we no longer believe that. So that leaves us at this moment in this country with a deficit of the willingness to die for something, because we don't believe that there's anything left other than our bodies. That, and we don't believe there's anything that's worth it, period. Now, another way of saying what would you die for is what would you live for? In other words, what would you give your life energy, your time, your talent, your treasure, your intention? What would you sacrifice something that was precious to you to accomplish? What would you live for? And many of us might find that a better, easier answer. I would live to be famous. I would live to be rich. I would live to be loved by everybody. I would live to be powerful. But again, I think these answers, when we answer that, we're showing that we have not seen the depth of who we are as human beings, as spiritual beings, really. The body and the mind are fascinating, beautiful, and transported us to many realms of experience and joy and suffering and intensity of identity, etc. They have done so much for us, but really at the point at which the question of death comes, we come to question, is that all there is to us? Is that all there is to us? Are Or are we just the body and the mind? And it's a really, really important question how you answer that. I was watching, I was falling asleep a lot. I was watching documentaries on, that were exploring the question of, in a very scientific way, who are you? Who are you really? One of the curious things they did was they started mapping the brain by having the cranium opened up and putting electrodes all over the thing, and then seeing what happens when they sparked an electrode. And they found this really fascinating, that one of the things that they've known for some time is that when you raised your hand, there's something fires inside your head. There's a electrical action inside your head. So, and then your hand goes up. And the question was, they would ask the people, so I should tell you this, they would sometimes fire it and someone's arm would go up, that spot, right? And they would ask the person, did you make that happen, or did we do it? And they were 100% correct. They would always know if they made the decision or if the electrode made the decision to raise their hand. That was kind of interesting in and of itself, that they could always tell the difference, because they could not feel the electrodes actually working. So it was really just the hand went up, and they had to know if they decided or if the machine had decided. What was curious, though, was they could fire that and they could stop it. They could stop it from happening. And so what the researcher came up with, there may not be anything called free will, but there is definitely free want. I won't do that. And that was in the level of conscious decision making. It was at a level that they could never find conscious decision making by mapping the brain. They could not find that high level of thought, reason, like conviction, etc. They couldn't find that in the brain by firing any electron anywhere in the brain, but they could get the body to move, they could have emotions, they could have many of the movement, etc., all that sort of stuff that could happen with the brain, but they couldn't get essentially the higher functions of the mind by tapping any part of the brain, which led the researcher to believe that the brain was not the level did not produce the level of what we would call rational intelligence. That's kind of weird, isn't it? It's not that it's not located there, but many parts of the brain are. In other words, essentially the animal parts of your brain can be mapped and can be proven to be able, you can stimulate it and something happens, but you cannot prove that the brain can fire and make rational decisions nor higher levels of thought. There's no calculus place, there's no, poetry or any of that stuff. No place in the brain that works. So the conclusion was that the brain was not the mind. It was used by the mind, but it was not the mind itself. Which is kind of like they were really hoping to find reasons to believe in God, I believe. And in this, I think what it says is that when you find something, as it relates to this subject, when you find something worth dying for, something that you have agreed to, you can override your natural habit of self-interest. That what is transcendent in you, what is not physical in you, can override your fear of dying, can override the selfishness that is natural to us, natural to the body. The body definitely wants to preserve itself. It definitely wants to make sure that it is not embarrassed in public. It definitely doesn't want to be hurting. These things that are definite about this being can be overridden by your conscious decision. And I believe when we are in a state like we are in the 21st century here, where we're stimulated over and over and over, and the degree to which we give our power to our higher level of thinking is diminished by how much time we watching TikTok. That we don't practice these higher levels of imagination or thought or calculation or investigation with our higher thoughts. And so it seems to us that there really is less, perhaps there's less awareness of our transcendent self that would come by deeper exploration of our own thought process. That's one thing. That's still on a very materialistic way. I want to just say, what we've been talking about here for the last few months, and actually I was just kind of drawing on what Larry was saying last week. If you weren't here, we had a guest speaker named Larry Schelling. And he said, anything that can be taken from you is not who you really are. Well, that makes sense, right? You can have everything, but if you lose a limb, it's still you. You lose your job, it's still you. You lose a wife or a child, it's still you. You lose your job, it's still you. So what is the you is the real question. So obviously you could lose multiple parts of the body and that would not be you. And you might actually not be able to, you might be in a coma and you might not be very active, but there's still a you there. So what is this you that is who you really are? And what Larry was saying was essentially that you take everything away, including your concepts of what life is. And what you're left with is this awareness and maybe nothing else. The awareness itself may be who you are, this open field in which activity happens, like your body, your mind, etc. This open space that you become, that you realize that that's who you really are. Now, if you get to that point of deep reflection, then your fear of death diminishes by an enormous amount, because you can say no to that fear of death because you have a deeper understanding of who you are. And so when the instinctive fear of death, of pain, of sorrow, or even loss of face, loss of position, which I think is very much body and mind oriented, when you can even see that if you could catch that you are the space in which all events happen and not the events themselves, when you get there, then that which is happening to you can only get so deep into you, because you realize that you are much deeper than that. And that happens to be who you really are. That part that is not scratched or hurt or embarrassed or in fear. Those are parts of your mind body that are activated, but you don't have to buy it, because that is not who you really are. And on those brain studies, it seems to correlate it. You can say no to the sensation of move your hand, fear, anger. Isn't that remarkable? So you really are something that cannot be confined to the body. It may appear to be body, maybe in its expression right this minute, but it is not the totality nor the depth of who you are. And because that is true, then your ability to live life as though you are heroic, willing to die for something, or more precisely, willing to live for something, becomes more self-evident. Because you are not afraid of what you will lose by doing it. And so we can take this idea and we put it over an overlay on what Jesus did with his life. So Jesus is an interesting character because one, it was a long time ago. And two, there are many overlays of who we think Jesus is, etc. But from the few words that are in the four Gospels, one of the things we get is that this guy was pretty gutsy, willing to tell the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, who were like the quislings and power brokers of the era, you got nothing. Y'all are all wrong. You're actually worse than wrong. You're leading people astray. That's pretty bold. Or when he's on trial in front of Pilate, and Pilate says, hey, tell me, who are you? And he goes, I'm not saying anything. He goes, well, what is truth? I'm not saying anything. Well, I could kill you. I'm not saying anything. Because he's not his body and his mind. He is that thing that transcends the body and the mind. Now, I may be wasting a lot of time on this, but I really think when we get to this clarity that we are not the body and the mind, we start to live with a sense of joy and happiness that cannot be found in getting something new or attaining something. Becomes this joy and happiness becomes like the baseline because, hey, that's what awareness feels like. Joy and happiness and freedom. And we return to our deeper nature over and over, we become more or less happier than we have been before. We do not have an outer reason to be happy because we don't need an outer. If it shows up, wonderful. If it doesn't show up, we're still happy. And it's also my belief, and actually a little bit of my experience, that when you retain this happiness and this joy and this peace, what you find around you is the world begins to shuffle itself and begin to show you more of the happiness and peace experiences and fewer of the angry, loss, and sadness experiences. It's not 100%. We know Jesus died a miserable death, and that which brings us to one more thing. You're going to die. Do you know? Not anytime soon, not within I can't foresee that. Yeah, don't we deny it? Don't we all deny it? But it is the period at the end of the sentence of your life. It will happen. And since it will happen, why not live like you've already died? It's a fact, not yet present. But live like you've already died. So, as they say, dance like no one is looking and sing like you're Tim Smith. Love without fear. Think of that. How many of us have protected our hearts with our friends or loved ones because we just don't want to feel pain again? Or how many of us choose not to say words of kindness or love because we might look awkward or weird? Or maybe we don't say, hey, you need to stop that because something bad might happen to me. Or, how many of us don't live as boldly as we could because we're afraid we might die in some form or fashion? Society, self-image, physical, emotional, that we might be damaged. Let's just rethink this and consider the possibility that you're dead already. And live this life as though it's already over and you get a chance to do it again. Now, what would we be afraid of? What would we not be willing to do? How protected would we need our hearts to be? How fearless we could be in friendship and in kindness. How generous we could be with all our possessions and our time if you had already died and you got the chance to live it again. So what would you die or live for? That's a higher level of question than the animal nature of you can determine. So investigate. Transmute fear, reluctance into life by realizing there is something to live for. There is something to die for. Because what dies is not who you are. Let us pray. As we pause for a moment and feel into what this body-mind is feeling or thinking, let us acknowledge it and appreciate it. For it is giving itself to us to express who we really are. And to that, let us be grateful, deeply thankful, that the body and the mind are allowing us to express and will be with us until it can no longer do it. What a lovely servant. Now let us claim a higher, more elevated definition of who we are. You are a part of that one creative presence called God. The ultimate intelligence, the ultimate awareness, the source of life. That is who the real you is. Let us change our definition and change our destiny by doing it. And so it is. Amen. I hope you got something out of today's service. We intend to bring you things that will help you in your life become more of who you want to be, give you the freedom of forgiveness and the hope of expectancy that your life will unfold in a way that brings you joy, happiness, and is a contribution to the world. If you would like to contribute to this ministry, please go to unitytriangle.org, hit the donate button, and it will lead you into an easy way of doing that. We thank you for your attention and look forward to seeing you again here.